Hello students, we're now going to begin a set of video lectures on a very important topic, a topic that is at the nexus of science and our environment and our society and economics and even politics, and that's the subject of climate change. Let's address this topic by going back to where the story begins, and the story begins with someone named Dr. Charles Keeling. In 1956, a postdoc from Caltech named Dr. Charles Keeling began working for the Scripps Institute of Oceanography in La Jolla, California. He was interested in measuring the carbon dioxide levels in river water, and after a while he turned his attention to trying to develop a very sensitive manometric technique or method for measuring carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere. So in 1958, he began making these measurements on a routine basis. For his measurements, he intentionally selected places remote from forest and from cities because he wanted to avoid obvious sources of carbon dioxide, either from the consumption of CO2 due to plant life in the forest or the production of CO2 in cities through internal combustion engines of our automobiles, etc. So he picked for his research site Mauna Loa, the largest of the Hawaiian Islands. Not a bad choice, right? And this was also a location of other research laboratories. Scientists are no fools. Go to Hawaii. In his first measurements of the atmospheric level of CO2, they were at 310 parts per million by volume. Just note the number 310 as the first measurements he made. His goals were to see how precisely he could make these measurements. So he began making the measurements very routinely, and he first found a seasonal variation in the atmospheric level of carbon dioxide. This is shown in his first published graph to the right, where there was a peak in the spring months of March through May, and a minimum in the fall months of September through November. And his measurements again were made in Mauna Loa. And also he made measurements in some aircrafts, and he got bold and ventured to near the South Pole to the Little America Research Station on the Antarctica. And he postulated that the seasonal variations, that is the peaks in CO2 in March through May and the drops or minimums in the fall, September through November, that these were due to the consumption of atmospheric carbon dioxide during the growth seasons of plants. That is, it would drop throughout the growth season. Then through the late fall, through the winter, there would be an increase in carbon dioxide level until the early springs, at which time it would begin to drop again with the growing season. Carbon dioxide in the atmosphere being consumed as plants grow. Well, he was encouraged by Dr. Henry Wexler from the U.S. Weather Bureau to continue making his measurements monthly and even daily. And Keeling and researchers from that point on continued to make these measurements on a very routine basis. What is shown in this slide is a plot of the atmospheric carbon dioxide levels in Mauna Loa, Hawaii, from 1958 or so on to the present day. And what you will notice is two general observations. First, there's been a gradual increase in the level of carbon dioxide over time. Again, his initial measurements were around 310 parts per million, and current values are above 400. I'll show you in the next slide a very current measurement of the atmospheric carbon dioxide level. Also, he found that this diurnal or this annual cycle is very consistent, with a maximum in carbon dioxide levels in early spring and a minimum in late fall. Keeling then continued his studies by making measurements at various latitudes, from Point Barrow, Alaska, the northern part of Alaska, to La Jolla, California, to Mauna Loa, Hawaii, to the Christmas Islands, Samoa Islands, to the South Pole. That is at research stations all the way from near the North Pole to near the South Pole. And you can see the same general pattern. There's an annual or seasonal oscillations Plus, there is this gradual increase in the atmospheric carbon dioxide level over time from his original measurements around 1958 to the current year. This gradual increase turns out to be about 2 parts per million ppm per year. It is interesting that the magnitude of the oscillations due to the seasonal variation is larger in the northern hemisphere than in the southern hemisphere, the Christmas Islands, Samoa Islands, South Pole being in the southern hemisphere. But if you think about it, there's a much larger land mass in the northern hemisphere of Earth than there is in the southern hemisphere. The previous slide only went up to about 2010. The link shown here will take you to a site at Scripps Institute where you can see the current daily measurements of the atmospheric CO2 as part of this Keeling study. The take-home lesson from Keeling studies is that just since 1958, just in the last 50 to 60 years, there has been a 25% increase in the atmospheric carbon dioxide levels over this period of time. So the questions: what are the causes of production and consumption of carbon dioxide gas? That is, what is the carbon cycle, which we'll go into in the next video lesson. Another question: are there any data on carbon dioxide levels prior to 1958? And how do these levels compare to other historical carbon dioxide level data? And then the big question is, what does this have to do with climate anyway? We'll pause, take a little quiz, and in the next video lesson, we'll begin addressing those questions. See you in a while.